All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into Zustand,
Mhm.
which is this React state management library that's been making some waves.
Mhm.
And it's known for being this kind of like bare bones solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because you've been working with React for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like when you hear that description, bare bones like,
Yeah.
what comes to mind for you?
Well, I think back to like some of the earlier state management solutions that I used to use,
Yeah.
and just how much overhead there was and all the boilerplate and all the stuff that, really
Yeah.
wasn't core to actually managing the state itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I see something like Zustand come out, that's like, hey, we're just focused on
Yeah.
the core functionality. Like that's really refreshing.
Yeah, and I see that kind of reflected right in the documentation.
Yeah.
They describe it as a small, fast, and scalable, bare-bones state management solution.
Right.
And one of the things that they highlight is this comfy API
Mm.
based on hooks.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to kind of unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Like for listeners who might not be super familiar with hooks and how they work in React,
Yeah.
like how does that actually play out in Zustand?
Well, so the way it works is you essentially have your store, which is kind of like your central hub for all of your data.
Right.
And then you can update that data using a set function.
Okay.
And so you basically create this store using a create function,
Okay.
and then you can just access that store anywhere in your components using a hook.
Oh, wow.
So it's very, very simple, very straightforward,
Yeah.
and very easy to use.
And they give a pretty good example of this, like right off the bat in the documentation
Right.
with a simple counter.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how readable it is.
Yeah.
It's like you create the store you call set to increment the counter.
Exactly.
But it's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's a simple counter.
Right.
Like, how does that actually work with like a more complex state object? You've got nested data and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, so that's one of the really nice things about Zustand
Okay.
is that the set function that it provides,
Yeah.
it actually merges updates into the existing state.
Okay.
So you're not creating a whole new state object every time you want to make a change,
Oh, yeah.
which can be very expensive performance-wise.
Right.
So by merging the updates, you're actually only changing the things that need to be changed.
Okay.
And that can lead to some significant performance improvements.
Interesting. Interesting.
Especially when you're dealing with really large or complex state objects.
Now, there's this line in the documentation that really kind of jumped out at me. It says you can use the hook anywhere without the need of providers.
Uh-huh.
And I know a lot of people who've worked with state management libraries in the past
Yeah.
have probably had to deal with like a lot of providers.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what is the benefit of not needing providers?
So providers can definitely become a bit of a pain, especially when you're working with a really large application.
Right.
Because you end up with all these nested providers.
Yeah.
And it can get really hard to track what's going on.
Okay.
And it can also affect performance because every time the state changes, all of those providers have to re-render.
Right.
So by not needing providers, you can avoid all of that.
Oh, wow.
You can just use the hook directly anywhere in your component tree.
So like I could have a complex application with nested objects.
Yep.
And I wouldn't need a single provider.
That's right.
That's wild. I wish I had known about this when I was wrestling with Redux for weeks.
Yeah, Redux can definitely be a bit of a beast sometimes.
It can be.
But, Redux has its place.
Yeah.
It's still a very powerful tool for very large, complex applications.
Okay.
But for a lot of projects, Zustand is going to be a much better choice.
It's like the simplicity of it is really appealing.
It is, yeah.
It's almost like elegant in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So we've got this hook-based API, which feels very natural in React.
Mm.
We've got this set function that's merging updates, so we're not killing our performance.
Right.
And we don't even need any providers.
Exactly.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that even though it's bare bones,
Yeah.
it's still very capable.
Okay.
It can handle pretty much anything you throw at it.
Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive into Zustand.
Hmm.
I think I need to go play around with this now
I think you should.
because it seems like it could really change the way I approach state management.
It definitely could.
So yeah, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.
And for all of you listening out there, I encourage you to check out Zustand as well and see how it can benefit your projects.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth a look. All right, that's it for today. See you next time.